Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I am Amin Yazdani, Director of Canadian Institute for Safety, Wellness, and Performance, and the host for today's webinar. The webinar is co-hosted by the Canadian Institute for Safety, Wellness, and Performance at Conestoga College's School of Business, the Canadian Assistant Association Group, and the Center for Research on Work Disability Policy. Our panelists today will share their perspective on a healthcare and disability management service providers in work disability management system. I'm honored to introduce our panelists today. Drew Souza, an occupational health nurse for over 25 years and an executive director for the Ontario Occupational Health Nurses Association. Before taking this position, she retired from being the manager of the Employee Health Unit at the City of Mississauga, where she led a multidisciplinary team of claims and healthcare professionals in managing the disability and wellness programs for city staff over 17 years. Drew holds a certificate in workplace mental health from Queen's University and is a master trainer for the Mental Health Commission of Canada. Dr. Behti Noor-Zakia is an occupational therapist and assistant professor at the University of Toronto and holds the inaugural Emily Gelsaler Grant early career professorships in workplace mental health. Through an occupational lens, he utilizes a biopsychosocial approach. His research program is a systematic study of occupations in the area of work disability prevention, return to work, and disability management. This approach is designed to produce results directly applicable to identify and assess risk and to develop interventions for preventing or improving high-risk behaviors in the workplace. Last but not least, Dr. Donna Bain is experienced in designing, leading, and evaluating the impact of health, rehabilitation, and disability management services. Former roles include Chief Operation Officer and Vice President of Health Services at the Ontario Workplace Safety and Insurance Board. As CEO of Donna Bain and Associates, she provides advisory services to private and public sector organizations across Canada to improve the human and financial outcomes from their disability management programs. Donna is a graduate instructor at OCAD University in Toronto, where she teaches inclusive design. Her research publication include topics such as concussion treatment and opioid use policy. She holds a PhD from the Faculty of Medicine at University of Toronto. Welcome, our panelists. We also have Lena Lopez, the project manager from CSA Group. Drew, Behtin, and Donna, they were active members of the CSA Technical Committee to develop the standard, and Lena Lopez is the project manager for this work. We will begin today's webinar with a short presentation on CSA's standard development process by Lena Lopez. Then I will provide a high-level overview of the standard. We have presented 4 questions to our panelists, and they will speak to these questions following my presentation. If you have any questions during the presentation, please use the QA function of Zoom platform to ask your questions, and we'll get to them at the end of this webinar. Now, let's look at what CSA standard development process is. I will hand it over to Lena to quickly give us an overview of the CSA standard development process and how you can or you may be involved throughout the standard development process. Lena?
Yes, great. Thanks, Amin. Hi, everyone. I'm Lena, and good day. I'm going to go through a quick development process in the next 5 minutes. So just to provide you a quick overview about CSA Group. CSA Group is a global organization that looks at the mandate of social good, sustainability, and also safety in particular. There are 2 areas, 2 divisions at CSA. one that everyone might be quite familiar with from their own household, from the testing, inspection, and the marking of the CSA label. And then there's a division of the Standards Development Organization, and this is where standards are worked on, developed, and then sent out to the industries for looking at, and they are non-voluntary. So then it is up to legislation to determine whether they are adopted or not. So next slide. The next slide. So with all the standards development, they are developed through volunteers that sit on a technical committee. And at CSA, we have 12 areas of focus. The standard that we're going to be speaking about falls into the umbrella of occupational health and safety. But of course, it was developed in the occupational health and safety, but it overlaps into all sectors where there's workers. So here, the standard Z1011 work disability management, it is part of the management system suites at CSA, and it works with other standards as well. And it also works into the worker wellness area that we focus on at CSA. Next slide. With all the CSA standards, the development process is the same regardless of the areas of focus. So it really starts with an interest either from an individual and organization to create a processes, procedures to investigate a certain area. So with this worker disability, it came together there. Then it went into forming the technical committee, which the individuals on this call, the panel, are part of that committee. It went into the process of being drafted. It then goes out to public review, where the public gets to review that draft. And then it comes back to the committee to look at those changes, those recommendations, and for those changes to be considered. And then it moves forward into a final publication. Thank you. Next. So a question we often get asked, are the standards mandatory? So every standard that comes through is a voluntary standard. Now, at that point, organizations and governments can choose to adopt it. And often the question is, well, why would they want to adopt it? First one is what we hear is that it's a leading practice. It's defined by the technical experts in that area. For many organizations, it's a less expensive approach there. The work has already been done, and through best practices come together. And the great thing about every standard is that it's reviewed at a minimum at 5-year mark. So it's a living document. And it also promotes harmonization internationally, as CSA is accredited with Standards Council Canada, and often works closely as well with a lot of ISO standards as well. So next slide. Also, how to get involved. So there's different ways. So from individuals participating on an active CSA committee, to then looking at it from when a draft standard goes to public review to provide input and some feedback and comments. Also, CSA has a research arm that, if you're interested in looking at a particular area, that can be explored. CSA is always interested to hear from individuals, even from an idea perspective, or from a more relaxed point of view, is joining the online community and finding out what the conversation is in a particular area. So thank you, everyone.
Well,
over to you, Amin.
Thank you, Lena. Now let's look at what CSA Z1011 is all about. So one of the most important aspects of disability management from an organizational point of view is the impact it has on the productivity and performance of the organization. It also is important in terms of the impact it has on the economy. The issues around unemployment and underemployment of people with disability is also an important aspect of this disability management concept that makes it a significant global issue that has enormous impact on the economy. The annual cost of disability alone is estimated at $1 to $2 trillion worldwide. There are some estimates of the cost of exclusion of people with disabilities in the Canadian labor that is estimated to be at about 18% of Canada's GDP, and that is kind of roughly around $340 billion. And that's across all social domains, with again, productivity being a significant issue, and the output cost of about $62 billion. So if you look at these numbers, you're looking at a very significant issue, not only for Canadians, but again, across the globe. And that makes disability management very important and very critical for not only organizations, but at the society level. Add to this the current trend in developed countries and the prevalence of chronic and episodic disabilities that, as I said, is an increasing, and I'm sure you're aware of the issues around the aging of labor workforce that add to these complications. So what have we done to address this important issue? Have we been able to educate our employers, our decision makers, our leaders within organizations to address this global issue? Well, despite overwhelming amount of guidance and practices out there, and we researchers produce a lot of research evidence, it's still work disability management in many organizations is varied, is piecemeal, is a sidecar function within an organization, if any, and often not based on organizational-wide approach. So when, and through some of the research that we've done in the past, we realized that if the topic of disability management, if the topic of injury prevention is not part of organizations, a day-to-day business operation, is not part of the organization a strategy to address business challenges, the topic may not receive the attention that it deserves. So there is a need to incorporate best practices on work disability prevention and management into organizations' management system and day-to-day operation. And again, as I suggested, that's how you can bring employers and decision makers together to recognize the importance of this issue. I'm sure many of you that are attending this webinar are familiar with the complexity of work disability management process for many of the stakeholders involved throughout the process. We all acknowledge that employers are concerned about the high level of absenteeism and presenteeism and turnover. There are also some confusion about the role that the employer has in disability management process, given the range of programs that are out there. On the other hand, you have labor and union groups and worker representatives that they are concerned about sustainability of employment over lifetime of their members of workers and high unemployment level for persons with disability, and that again has significant socio-economical impact. Set aside the wage differences about for people with disability compared to other groups. In addition to employers and labor groups, you have disability support programs that are acting in silos with varied expectations of workers and employers. And again, this contributes to the complexity of disability management. Look at this as an input as how organizations are really able to get access to these programs, and that there are again some concerns about productivity and competitiveness of the economy that again becomes a significant issue for many of the disability support programs and providers. We also have the service providers that they are all concerned with their own roles and lack of coordination across different experts and specialists. So you're looking at a very complex issue from different perspectives, and that's why I think the group that got involved in several meetings over a period of about 16 months to develop this standard did their best to make sure that every stakeholder's point of view is heard and considered. The standard aims to promote proactive approaches towards work disability and highlights the importance of organizational strategy to address this issue before the onset of work disability. The disability management includes strategies to accommodate workers in order to prevent unnecessary absences or early and safe return to work when health absences occur. The technical committee members that put this standard together, they were focusing on making sure that the prevention strategies are looking at primary to secondary to tertiary prevention models, and they've seen this as being the most effective strategy. And also, one of the most important aspects of this standard is to looking at the managing disabilities throughout the employment cycle of individuals within the organization. The scope of this standard is to provide a framework for management of work disability at the organization level. So whatever you see in this standard, again, emphasizes the fact that organizations really need to focus on organizational-wide strategies to address work disability management. The standard has two main aspects. There are some clauses within the standard that they look into the content that has requirements and informative annexes that help organizations to implement this standard and better guide them to meet the requirements of this standard. We recognize that it is, practically impossible that the organization go from 0 to 100 within a 1 year time frame. Therefore, the standard has been framed in a way that helps organizations to kind of scope out what they want to do first, and they will be able to kind of implement the standard throughout a time frame that works for the organization. The key requirements of this standard fits within the PDCA model, Plan, Do, Check, Act model of management system, and allows seamless integration to organization-wide models to address business challenges. The key requirements focus on establishing a systematic approach and assist employers to implement the program, as I said, based on their needs, their capacities, limitations, and resources that they might have available. I also want to highlight the standard really focuses on highlighting a collaboration between senior management, worker representatives, other internal and external stakeholders, including healthcare professionals and disability management service organizations. One might ask where to start, and as I said, the standard has focused on the individual's employment cycle and how this standard could be applied throughout that process. So you might be asking, is it the only accommodation of injured workers or only when you hire a person with disability? Well, the standard is work disability management as a continuum in terms of managing worker health over their time with the organization, from recruitment, hiring, onboarding, through to job continuity and advancement, and eventually a departure from the organization. And again, the standard provides some additional guidance that would help organizations to go through that process. One of the, I guess, important aspect of the standard is the annexes, the informative annexes that I think will really assist employers and organizations to easily implement this standard. The Annex B of the standard includes several informative annexes, including the one, again, that provides high-level guidance on the role of healthcare professionals and similar experts in disability prevention and management. The annex includes key principles, such as the organization's responsibility, consistency in approach to disability accommodation, a scope of work disability management. As I said, this could be set by the organizations of how they would go about implementing this standard. The role of case management, the role of healthcare professionals as consultants to the process, perhaps not as primary decision makers, and maintaining medical confidentiality highlights the importance of responsibilities for workers, as well as the guidance to workplace parties. So the annex really helps organizations into how they can incorporate different experts, including healthcare professionals, throughout the process. Well, this was a very quick snapshot of the CSA Z1011 scope and its structure. As highlighted moments ago, I think the standard does a really good job in providing guidance and requirements on the role of healthcare professionals in disability management services. Well, our panelists today will share their perspectives on the role of these key players in disability management. So let's begin with Donna Bain. Dr. Bain will kind of present her perspectives around these questions that was presented to her. And you can see them in this screen. So Dr. Bain, within the next 10 minutes, will walk us through what she thinks about the role of healthcare providers in disability management services and disability management. Dr. Bain, the floor is yours.
Well, great. Thank you very much, Amin. And thanks for the opportunity to really share my views on these questions in the context of the standard. You know, when you look at these questions, and when I looked at them, the first thing that struck me was really appreciating kind of the underlying theme of the questions, which is in fact an underlying theme of the standard, which is about support. So how do we support workplaces in all these different kinds of ways that we'll go through in these questions, so that we're supporting organizations, we're supporting workers. Just to begin, I find the sort of phrase of healthcare providers and disability management service providers a little bit cumbersome. So sometimes I might just say providers or service providers. And I just wanted to let you know, I'm always thinking of all of them, but just in the way I say it, know that that's an encompassing term. So in terms of the first question about the role, in my view, the role is really about bringing knowledge, evidence, and experience, and I want to say along with compassion, to improve the success of these workplace disability management programs for workers and for organizations. And as Amin just shared with you, the role, I guess, from the technical committee's perspective of us in this context as providers was really so important that we thought there needed to be a separate annex that really talked about the role, quote, of experts, because it's so important, and the opportunities are really great for this group to be of great assistance. And I think to do that our providers really need to be well placed to tailor their services across all the kinds and sort of sizes of organizations that are described in the standard. So it's really taking, in my view, the role is taking all of the expert knowledge and then applying it to the unique circumstance of each organization in the design, the implementation, the evaluation of the program, and similarly, sort of at the case level, to the uniqueness of each worker. In my experience, there are a lot of similarities across organizations, but I've yet to find two that are exactly the same. And so I think the role of our healthcare providers and disability management service providers is to really adapt their knowledge and their service to the uniqueness of each situation. And again, at the case level, as Amin mentioned, the role here is through the entire employment life cycle. So this is not just what do you do when an event occurs and something needs to be addressed, but it's really helping take a proactive, planned approach from the entire life cycle view and helping organizations with that. I also think providers bring a unique ability to shine a spotlight on some of the overarching concepts that we all know and are mentioned, some in the standard itself, such as confidentiality, about focusing on function rather than on medical diagnosis, and embracing a multidisciplinary approach. And it's interesting for this group that though we're talking about healthcare providers, let's say, it's really eschewing, I think, the medical model and really focusing on that biopsychosocial mindset that is an important role of this group, and really helping the collaborative process so that at the end of the day, we're creating accessible workplaces that are for really a diverse and inclusive workforce. Going to the second question, now sort of getting a little bit more granular about what can providers do in helping organizations establish a program. And again, this sort of organizational wide is a cue to kind of what's in the standard around, first of all, this not being an HR function, that this is really a comprehensive view of work disability management, and showing organizations how there are lots of things that they may have or that they hope to have that fit into a workplace, a work disability management program. So for example, EAP, that there aren't things that are hived off to the side, but how do you create a systemic view and a comprehensive view of these kind of programs? And I think part of that is helping organizations when they're establishing programs to be thinking that this is about wellness and prevention, it's for physical and mental health promotion, it's proactive, and really helping them move from what might be sort of outdated and old paradigms to helping them move to sort of more current approaches to this. So that, and one of those, of course, and I think of course, our provider community is so expert at this, is taking a worker-centric view. I mean, this comes naturally to this provider group who are accustomed to patient-centered or family-centered care models, but helping to embed that worker-centric approach when organizations are establishing a program, embedding it from the beginning is just so critical. The other thing that I think that comes intuitively, I hope, at least I think, to our provider and service provider groups is this evidence-informed approach. I think it's not only that they can help when organizations are seeking to establish a program to talk about it, but to also bring evidence to the table and to show how theoretical evidence can be applied so that it doesn't become something that organizations can't translate science into something that they can deliver at the shop floor, that providers can help them when they're establishing programs to do that kind of work. And then lastly, just on this one question, I'll say, I think by bringing creativity to organizations as they start to establish programs, that providers can be very helpful in demystifying what sometimes I think can seem quite daunting and to organizations in terms of establishing programs. Yes, as Amin said, there is complexity to this, but I think if we can start to make it seem less opaque and more clear around how you could do this, that we will be providing a great service to organizations as they start out on this journey. And one thing I just want to mention here is, I don't think often, people are invited to assist organizations to, let's say, address culture. But as you're developing this program, you will in fact be addressing culture and attitudes and sort of supporting the systemic approach to developing a program. So the more we can have our organizations be informed at the beginning, I think the better that will be. The last piece I just want to say, just before I forget on that, is I also think in establishing a program, it's really important for us to be bringing the lens of evaluation so that we're not talking about evaluation at the end, but at the design phase. So when you're establishing it, that evaluating it so that you could be making course corrections, so you're focusing on outcomes is really, really important. Okay, moving to the third question. I think if I just want to talk about, now we're talking about supporting workers as opposed to organizations. And this is in the context of timely and safe return to work. So this is not from a preventive lens, but we have an incident. I think, of course, this is a very long conversation, but just to highlight a few things that providers are very strong at doing is developing a plan with the worker as an active participant. So this is not a professional activity. This is a collaborative activity with workers, full participation, and coordinating across providers, working closely with unions, with the employer, and with providers of services in the community, I think can be all ways that healthcare providers and disability management services can really help workers achieve a return to work. And I want to just focus on this safe word because I assume it's intentional in the question, and I really want to say that I think it's incumbent on providers to remain vigilant with respect to safe return to work. I don't think anyone designs a return to work plan that they think is unsafe, but sometimes things evolve. And so I think one of the really important things that we can do to support injured workers is to always be vigilant around ensuring it's a safe return to work. And then, of course, supporting them with, these respectful relationships. And at the organizational level, I think the way we also support workers here is to remember that we are wanting to take an inclusive lens. This is not a medical model. We're not seeking to, quote, fix workers, but to really use this biopsychosocial approach to ensure, a workplace that's fitting with, what our workforce brings to it. Finally, just in terms of the last question, of course, I'd be remiss by not saying that this is a fabulous standard, and there are many terrific aspects to it, and just a couple I want to focus on, and Amin's called them out as well. One is the systemic approach, that taking a systems view is key. It's a proactive, not a reactive approach. The Plan, Do, Check, Act model, I think, provides flexibility so that each organization can take this on in the bite-sized pieces that it can accomplish, that's within its capacity, that it doesn't force an organization to take on more than it can handle, but gives them a way to get started. And for those who already have programs, then it's helping them to figure out how they can get through a continuous improvement cycle and to keep making improvements. So not, acknowledging there's never a finished state to this. The standard strength, I think, is that it's not a workers' comp guide. It's not a short-term disability guide, that it's really running this whole range of organizations, of employment cycle, and embracing physical as well as mental health challenges so that it's very encompassing. And the last piece I'll mention that I think is really very helpful are these annexes that are there. And one of the bonuses, I think, of the annex is that the annex goes from theoretical to practical. So it really gives people with limited experience, organizations with limited experience in workplace disability management to get a clear sense of, like, what does this concept look like in application? Can I make this fit for me? How would I do that? And I think that's one of the really great things about having these annexes, is to helping them move from theory to application. These aren't just words, these are things that they can understand and fit to themselves. So thanks for the opportunity, Amin, to share my view on these questions.
Thanks, Donna. It was very informative, and we appreciate your perspective on these important issues. Our next panelist is Drew Souza, and again, Drew will speak to these questions. Drew, we're excited to hear your perspective, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Amin, and the group for allowing me to participate. I do want to preface my conversation by really highlighting the fact that right now, today, I'm going to be representing the occupational health nurses here in Ontario, who are at this point in time sort of front and center when it comes to occupational health, especially during these times of COVID. So while my conversation or my points will try to highlight the service providers, not just at the work site, but also those external to the work site, I'm going to be totally transparent and say that obviously my view might be slightly different, because my colleagues, the folks that I work with on a day-to-day basis, tend to be within the work site. So if we can go to the first slide. So when I looked at the role, really, what kind of role can service providers play in work disability management? I really thought that it was really critical for us to understand that that role is going to be diverse, dependent upon a whole host of different factors. So first off, the organization's mandate. So the next point, which is really going to have to be a clear understanding about what is this organization hoping to accomplish when they put together this program? Is it about containing costs? Is it about only meeting legislative obligations? Or do they have an ethical and moral reason to put a program like this into place? And I think that's important, because if you understand what's the intent of the organization's program, then you'll get a better understanding as to really what resources are they going to be bringing to the table, and then from a healthcare perspective, are you looking at a workplace or an organization that has where treatment is readily available, where they have a supportive benefit package? Are there cultural issues that we need to take into consideration within this particular community? Because as Dawn has indicated, the community's culture, where people are what perspective they come to the table at, will also make it a big challenge in terms of understanding what is the role that our various service provider puts into place. Then let's take a look at our organizational obligations. What are the labor issues? Do they have a negotiated contract? Do they have good relationships? What about the community? Is there a relationship within the community that they need to maintain, and that they wish to have a certain persona, a certain, what's the PR requirements? And ultimately, really, what is the organization's culture? Does the organization have a culture that will support what level of involvement is required to put together a fulsome program? Or is it one that isn't really ready for something like that? Then you're looking at the resources, again, what are the benefits? What kind of human resources individuals do they have? Are they looking at health and safety individuals? Are you looking at actually having an on-site healthcare professional, occupational health or employee health? Ultimately, it really comes down to, and this is what the standards is constantly talking to us about, is what is the management commitment to a program of this kind? And are they ready for change, or are they looking to maintain the status quo? These are all important elements, because understanding where the organization is, where the employee is, where the community is, helps us appreciate what's the role that the service provider can bring to the table. When we're looking at the service provider, are you looking at this being actually a healthcare professional? Are you looking at somebody with a medical background who can understand the biopsychosocial model? Are you looking at someone who has a case management experience but brings to the table a whole host of different expertise that may not be healthcare related? Are you looking at it being a healthcare professional, rather an HR professional who only handles these cases on a one-off kind of basis and doesn't really have a clear understanding of all the opportunities that provided? Or are you looking at someone with a health and safety perspective? Again, a different skill set that they bring to the table means that they may handle things a little differently. Ultimately, the next point really is, from a worker perspective, what is the workplace culture? Really, I think that is the key to understanding what role a service provider can bring when they're managing disability. What is the culture of that workplace, and are they committed to providing a wholesome program that is fair, transparent, and consistently applied? Or is this really just a matter of doing the bare minimum in order to get by, because that's what the legislation requires? So when I talked about the second slide, so when we talk about what can you do, it depends on what's needed and what resources are provided, right? But when you're talking specifically about how can healthcare providers and disability management services actually support a program, so the program in of itself, it really comes back down to the basic elements of the Plan, Do, Check, Act scenario, right? In my humble opinion, using the standard as the model, healthcare providers or disability management service organizations really take a look at it and ensure that there is a program that they can manage that is created with the best possible focus and using best practices, which is what the CSA-Z 1011 really describes, is what is best practices, how do you make this a fulsome program, how do you ensure you get buy-in, and it describes that in a great deal of detail. So it provides you that framework. Then what's the next element? What they can do to support the program from an organizational perspective is to manage the consistent implementation of the program, right? So yes, you've created the program. Now someone needs to make sure that it's managed consistently, right? And again, it's that fair, transparent, and consistent management of the program, right? And then to support, as Don has indicated, that ongoing quality assurance measures, right? Is there actually a ongoing opportunity for change and as the program changes, as the organization changes, as the resources change? Is there someone constantly looking at the program and tweaking it so that it continues to be a live and vibrant program, that it meets the needs of the community as we progress? At the end of the day, really, in my opinion, the healthcare provider on site or the disability management service organization that is most likely off site really needs to be the subject matter expert. They need to be the go-to that the organization or the employee or the labor group can trust, asking the questions and knowing that they're going to get the best possible approach and the most consistent response. When we're looking at healthcare providers, what can healthcare providers do to support an injured worker, it really comes down to and I start off with the very basics, right? So what can you do to support the actual worker? Well, let's make sure that at the very minimum, you're going to get compliance to all relevant legislation, right? So let's make sure that at the minimum, we are going to get that basic. You're going to make sure that the program is fair, equitable, transparent, and consistently applied. And I think that's critical because at the end of the day, certainly while you want the program to be tailored to meet the individual needs of the program, the concepts and the philosophy and the strategy should be consistent, right? We also want to make sure that the worker themselves is making an informed decision regarding, how they wish to participate, what their responsibilities are, what the employer's obligations are, so that they can understand that they're part of this success. Again, as Donna's indicated, this is not performed in a silo. It is about conversation and about making sure that we all come to the table understanding where the opportunities lie and where there may be some barriers for success. When you depending on the program objectives and the skill set of the provider or the service, really, getting down to brass tactics, it comes down to helping the worker to achieve maximum medical recovery. Now, I'm going to say that really depends upon the model that you've embraced. Certainly the biopsychosocial model allows you that opportunity, but it depends on what the criteria, or rather, what are the service provider skills in order to help with that piece, right? You're going to assist in determining job fit, right? So at the end of the day, is there a fit between what the person's abilities are and the job within? You're going to support their ongoing career growth, and this is what excited me about the model, the CSA model, the Z1011, was because we were talking about this not just one time. It's not a box you check off. This is an ongoing process that needs to be followed as the worker moves through their career. And then ultimately, and sometimes we forget this, because this can still be considered successful when necessary, and on the very rare occasion, assist in assessing opportunity for alternate work outside of an organization, right? So this is where I think sometimes we're challenged in understanding that there are times where it is not in the worker's best interest to continue working within the organization for whatever reasons. But let's make sure that has been sort of like, that's the end, that's the very last possible result that we're looking for. But when that happens, assisting the worker and understanding that it isn't just about the workplace, that one workplace, it's about the worker's work life, which may extend beyond that workplace. What facets of the program did I find helpful? the framework, right? The formula was critical to me. The focus on, as I just indicated, the employment life cycle. I think when we look at the guiding principles to support the customization of the program, that it's evidence-based, that it's focused on inclusion and accessibility, that it's worker-centric, promotes accommodation and timely and safe return to work, that it's an understanding that it's a joint responsibility, right? And that it ensures legal compliance. So those guiding principles. I personally had found, as I think some of both Amin and Donna indicated, that the implementation really provided the key elements, right? And to me, the informative annexes especially were extremely useful resources. I've highlighted specifically Appendix B, which talks about the role of the experts, because I think it's, again, important to understand that the role is dependent upon the skills provided by the experts, which of course comes down to what does the organization need. And then I found the case studies quite helpful as well, predominantly because they helped us sort of see how this would work and what success looks like. But as a whole, the annexes to me were extremely supportive in moving forward and very helpful. So at the end of the day, what the really impact of providing this standard is really that transparent, fair, and consistent process. The fact that you're talking about building trust, decreasing anxiety, ensuring that there's appropriate job matches, improved labor relations, increased morale, maximum use of resources, and again, that, at the very minimum, meeting the legislative requirements. There's a whole host of reasons why one should move forward with the standards as they are. But I just felt it was important to highlight those. The reasons why you want to move ahead. Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate and for allowing me to express my viewpoint.
Thank you, Drew. Very insightful. I appreciate your perspective and sharing your perspectives with us today. Our next presenter is Dr. Noor Zekia, who will share his perspective on the role of healthcare and disability management service providers. Behdeen, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much. I'm humbled to be here, and the fact that I heard from my esteemed colleagues, they've done such a fantastic job presenting this standard that I'll try to add in places that I think might be beneficial to the audience, particularly from my perspective as an occupational therapist and from a rehabilitation standpoint. I think one of the strengths, as it's been mentioned, and I think what I like a lot about the standard, it's return. It's focused rather on the worker and placing them at the center of the conversation and allowing everyone to liaise through that worker that knows what they need to have, whether it's to stay at work, return to work, or whatever other processes are going on in the workplace. So I think that's a nice feature of it. I also want to talk a little bit about functioning and why the biopsychosocial model is beneficial in this approach, particularly from the perspective of looking at it outside of the biomedical model that I think all of us have been talking about, how the standard is not framed around that, meaning that we're not just going to look at impairment or disease and focus on rectifying that. And ultimately, when you rectify that issue, that disability or that disease, the individual is going to have no issues sustaining work or going back to work. Rather, what we're saying is that the biopsychosocial model, and if I can put the academic hat on very briefly, there's quite a bit of literature in the peer review body to support that if you look at it through a biological lens, a psychological lens, a functional lens, a rehabilitation lens, you will provide much better care. You'll have better outcomes. The data supports that. Now, if you're interested in that, I'm happy to share with you articles. We just don't have the time to do that in this setting. And I think that's one of the strengths of the biopsychosocial model. So just to situate the conversation for those of us that are so ingrained and used to the biomedical model being the dominant way of thinking or the paradigm, and it still is very much so. The other aspect that I'll add that perhaps occupational therapists and occupational therapy can provide is from a functional perspective. So there was a question, I'm jumping ahead, but forgive me, about what's the difference, for example, between a medical recovery and a functional recovery. From the functional perspective, it is to go beyond just looking at it from an impairment focus. So if you look at the worker, what types of strengths or abilities do they have, and how do you build on that so that, for example, they can go back to work or stay at work or prevent them from getting hurt in the workplace? That's very much been within the philosophy of occupational therapists and a rehabilitation mindset for a very, very long time. And it's nice to see that this standard in particular embraces that and says that, yes, indeed, we want to look at someone's ability and build on that so that they can be successful in the workplace. And finally, I'll just add that this is indeed a collaborative process. And a collaborative process, you heard about many different stakeholders that are at the table. There's healthcare providers like us here that are regulated. There are others that play a very important role, both from a human resources perspective, from an employer side, the employee, their allies, whether they're unions, associations, and elsewhere. And there are probably many others as well. When I teach on this topic, I tell our OT students, if you are at a party and you want to have a fun game, ask everybody to pick one role in the return to work process. And no matter how many people you have at the party, you'll find that there's more roles than there are people at that setting, meaning that this is a complex issue. This is complex in terms of its navigation, in terms of the delivery of services, and ultimately in putting the worker in the middle of all this where they belong, which is they know what it is that they need, and how do we support them, in this case, as healthcare providers. So I'll just close by saying the following. I think that the standard is well situated, both from a preventative perspective, from a research perspective, and also from a clinical perspective. And I think it's very exciting to see that both the CSA group and the work that's going on with CISWP at Conestoga College is putting this at the forefront. And I'll just say that Canada is really demonstrating leadership in this area. And there's a lot of attention being given to the standard, not only nationally, but internationally as well. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon.
Thank you, Bethine. So now Lena will moderate the panelist discussion.
Thank you, Min. Hi, everyone. A question received from the audience is the following. Could you please elaborate more about the function versus medical diagnosis paradigm? So that question's out to all the panelists.
And I'd say you sort of started that in your remarks. Do you want to just take that?
Yeah.
Sure. I just didn't want to speak twice about it. And sorry that I jumped ahead. It just demonstrates my enthusiasm for the topic. Yeah, I think, just to add to that, the piece from the functional side is to look at the individual once they're in the workplace, not only from an impairment or a disease lens, but one of an ability. So everyone's got a different level of ability, and to look at it, for example, from a strengths-based approach, or whatever the case may be, or if I could just use lay language, looking at the cup half full rather than half empty goes a long way. And that's essentially what the difference would be between just looking at it through a medical model lens and one that's looking at function, and how function is important ultimately to supporting someone in the workplace. Whatever it is that they're able to do, you identify that and you build on those strengths. And there's many ways of doing that, and a shameless plug for OTs, but we're very good at doing that.
Thank you.
I mean, could I just add one comment, Lena?
Yes, go ahead.
Just to build on, if you in the annex for the expert, so it does talk about the difference between functional limitations and a diagnosis for the purpose of accommodation, and sort of calls out what Bedna just said about the presence of a medical condition doesn't necessarily create a functional limitation. It has an impact on the person's ability to do their job. So it's called out as well in the annex in the standard.
Great. Now, the next question is in the area of confidentiality and privacy. Is there any guidance around confidentiality given the role of several external and internal stakeholders in the process?
So it's Drew. the guidance again really comes down to dependent upon the role that those various stakeholders are playing within the organization. You'll find that if you have a healthcare professional, be it an OT or a nurse, who is providing that level of service internally, they will maintain the privacy to the nth degree. But again, if you use the biopsychosocial model, there is really no need to get into specifics. What you're focusing your attention on is, what is this person's abilities, or, limitations and restrictions, and how can you do the job fit? It doesn't matter what the condition is. That is, knowing the condition is helpful if you're taking an extra step and you're doing some additional case management to help ensure that they've reached maximum medical recovery. But if you're focusing your attention on, supporting and assisting in job fit, then the privacy and the confidentiality is quite honestly easily maintained if it's understood as to the purpose behind the role that you're playing.
Thank you. Make sure I'm not on mute. Anyone else like to add to that? Thank you. I'm just looking at the Q&A. There's no more questions at this time, so I'm going to hand it over to Amin.
Hey, thanks, Dana, for moderating the panel discussion. Before we end today's webinar, I'm pleased to announce our future webinars. Our next webinar is on March 22nd that will focus on labor perspectives on disability management. Other webinars will be hosted by our partner, CWPR. The recording of our webinars will be available through our YouTube channel. If you need the slide deck, please feel free to contact me and I'll be happy to share with you the slide deck. But all of the recordings of our webinars will be available and are available through our YouTube channel. I'm very grateful to our panelists today for their generous kind of time and commitment to support our webinar series. Behdin, Drew, and Donna were active and key members of the technical committee for the development of the CSA standard. Again, I'll thank for all your support in the past 2 years. I would also I would like to also thank Lena Lopez and the CSA group for their support. At the end, thanks for attending our webinars today, and I hope to see you all on March 22nd. Have a wonderful day.